my area in teaching covers children, then step away a minute, individuals with disabilities, international and national law related to those two groups, which have an unfortunate connection often in the way those two individual groups are treated. What I was asked to do today was to talk a little bit about the convention. I know some of you are probably very familiar with it. We're just going to do it really quickly, sort of, as Becky said, set the stage. But I really want to talk about how the convention might be used to change the picture for individuals, the grassroots picture of individuals with disabilities. And I caveat here, I have not worked in implementing the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but I spent over 20 years working on the Convention on the Rights of the Child in Southeast Asia. And I think a lot of what I've learned over those 2 decades on the CRC implementation is going to be very applicable to the new convention. So again, to sort of set the stage for the convention, like our own country and a lot of the rest of the world, there's been an evolution in the way the UN has looked at disability. And so if you go back to the 40s and 50s, it was very much a focus, a medical type model, looking at fixing, curing, not to minimize the importance of that, so that's not a pejorative statement, and spending a lot of money developing regional centers, institutional settings, again, not to mean pejorative when I use that term, but segregated kind of facilities, and then a lot of money in training professionals. So it was very much that idea of we need professional expertise to help individuals with disabilities. In the 60s, it began to change at the UN policy level, and it was an effort more at looking at including individuals and participation in society. And in the 70s, you had another sort of evolutionary move, I think, and our disability rights movement in this country and in Western Europe in particular were, I think, somewhat supportive of that move towards human rights and equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities. It was the next decade, the 80s really, the UN raised the issue of discrimination, human rights violations against individuals with disabilities and designated that 10-year period as the decade of disabled persons. And at the end of it, we had, or just following that, we had the development of the standard rules for the equalization of opportunities for persons with disabilities, which I never can say. We call standard rules, and Bridget mentioned these this morning as sort of guidelines for her mission statement and the purposes for her organization. So in a nutshell, what are these? They're the primary UN, they still are in existence, primary UN standards guiding action at the national level. Incredibly important prior to the convention. And there's the sort of global purpose statement to ensure the opportunity to exercise the same rights and obligations, interestingly enough, is in there as others. Again, you know, to really summarize these, they're quite long, but they to me, quite interestingly, they offer preconditions for equal access to community and then target areas for equal participation. So it's really kind of a development idea, in a way, capacity building before one can actually measure successful equal participation. Very detailed implementation measures for states parties if they chose, because it's totally voluntary and no enforcement mechanism per se. But if states parties wanted some guidelines, a lot of details on how to implement these goals. It did include a monitoring mechanism, and those of you who know human rights, other human rights treaties know that it's not uncommon for the UN to have a special rapporteur or someone doing oversight of the implementation of a human rights treaty, and they had such a thing with the standard rules. And just to highlight, even back in 1993, there was a concern about assistive technology and adaptive equipment for individuals, and so I've got Rule 4 up there. States parties should ensure the provision of AT, support their development, production, distribution, etc. So how successful were these rules? Well, they really weren't successful. Now, that's a generalization, and there were certainly some areas where they were successful, but didn't really improve any individual lives that were measurable. States parties did adopt these standard rules, some all, some part, and incorporate into their national legislation. But the sort of monitoring mechanism found that there was little done by the state's parties to educate society as a whole, professionals, individuals with disabilities, anybody, or to fund implementation or monitor the effects. So the second report that was done by the special rapporteur had this interesting statement, which I've always really liked, and I think is really important for the things that you all have been talking about today, that the standard rules did not include any strategy for improving living conditions of disabled people in the regions with extreme poverty. So already here you're seeing the UN linking very closely this issue of poverty and disability, which is a really dangerous cycle to start getting fixated on in a way, but there's some truth in poverty creates disability, disability can create poverty, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So I highlighted that for you there in that report. Largely, I think because of that second report that came out from the rapporteur, there was a concerted effort to get an international human rights treaty focused specifically on individuals with disabilities. So we now, since this was passed, we now have 4 thematic human rights treaties. That does not mean that individuals in these thematic conventions are not covered by the basic human rights treaties, because they are. But it's a recognition at the UN level that these are particularly vulnerable populations where the earlier human rights treaties have not been successful in ensuring equality. So individual ones are developed. It was done quickly for the UN system, really in the space of 4 years. In New York, bringing together people from all over the world, large representation from disabled persons organizations around the world. It was really, it's all available on the web. You can get all the agenda and the minute meeting minutes, and really see the participation from all over the world. I think it's pretty awesome. So it was entered into force. There were enough signatures in May of 2008, so we're just 2 years into it. 145 states parties, so we have about 191 states parties in the world, nations. So 145 have signed it, and again, I'm sorry if this is all old news to you, but a signature does not mean the same as a ratification for an international treaty. Signature means that the head of the government has signed the document, but then it also has to go through some kind of legislative process to be ratified. So, for example, Obama has signed the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but Congress has not, the Senate has not ratified it. So there's a difference there, and that's why your numbers are different. Many more states parties have actually signed it than have ratified it. That's not a surprise. Optional protocol I'll talk about in a minute, but that's a separate document which many fewer countries have signed or ratified. This just gives you a visual snapshot. The countries that are, I think it's supposed to be black, but it's sort of gray to me up there. Those are the countries that have not signed or done anything with the convention to date. The light blue and the dark blue are either signed the convention and the optional protocol or ratified the convention. The orange are ratified convention and the yellow, which is where we are, is signed the convention. So you can get a glimpse of it. It's quite quick, actually, compared to other human rights treaties. Only the Convention on the Rights of the Child was more rapidly ratified around the world. Okay, general principles. I won't go into all of these, but I did want to highlight a couple. Full and effective participation, inclusion in society. There's been a lot of discussion about that this morning, today, and it's one of the primary principles of this document. Full and effective participation, which we all know, is very different than just simply participation. Equality of opportunity, accessibility, and then finally, respect for the inherent dignity, autonomy, freedom to make one's own decision. Quite broad principles. I doubt anyone would argue with them. However, how these are going to actually be implemented and how they're going to play out in national legislation is going to be interesting to see. Someone mentioned the experience that we've had in this country with the Americans with Disabilities Act and our other disability rights legislation, and it has been a very complicated legal process in trying to